Sleep training was really hard though. It's also the best thing that I've ever done.
And it can be tough. I have been chased out of a home years ago with a broom by a grandma. She was not happy. There are two main triggers in life: sleep deprivation and children crying. So you combine those two things and you've got the ultimate trigger.
There's always that story about the Romanian orphanage where all these babies were crying and crying, and then after that they just stopped crying because no one came to them.
Mums in particular, we've been conditioned over centuries to think that if they're crying, we're not doing the right thing.
We think sleep training is actually for the kids, but it's actually really about sleep training the parents. But is it me denying my kid a secure attachment with me? Before we start this episode, can I ask for a quick favor for you to like and subscribe on YouTube or leave us a 5-star rating on Spotify? It would mean so much to us and will make a really big difference. Thank you so much. Hi, welcome to The Real Reason. And today we are doing a very special episode with a sleep trainer. So quick story, I'm a mum to 2 boys, 6 and 9 years old today. And 6 years ago, I really struggled, particularly 9 years ago. I will always remember this. My husband and I, back then, we were staying in the eastern part of Singapore, in Tampines, and we were so desperate at 11 p.m. that our son wouldn't sleep that we would put him in the car, in a car seat, and he's crying. He just wouldn't go to his cot to sleep. And we would drive around Singapore, drove to the airport, drove back, and then we waited for him to fall asleep. And then we're like, okay, it's safe. And then we would carry him up and put him in cot. And this happened a few times, believe it or not. And so with my second kid, I was so determined that we were not going to go through that again. And I engaged a sleep consultant. And my life transformed. My husband and I could go for date nights. I can actually focus on my career. And I'm in a much better mood because I'm not sleep deprived. So I can't wait for you to hear from Louise Duncan, a very well-known sleep trainer, coach in Singapore, who's transformed the lives of many families here. Welcome, Louise.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. And this is, for me, my first podcast.
So, Louise, tell us, what's the real reason people call mums like me who do sleep training monsters?
Oh, it's such a tricky topic, sleep training, because it is actually quite polarising. You get the parents that don't think that their children should ever cry, and at the first sign of any kind of upset, they want to fix the problem. Parenting is hard, and I think that, parents like to pit themselves into particular camps, and I think that because sleep training is polarising because of the crying that can be involved for a short period of time, that parents focus on that. So
Yes.
the parents that don't like to hear any crying whatsoever can be a little bit judgmental of those of us who think to ourselves, even if I'm carrying my baby, they're crying. So if I lay them in their cot and they're crying, what difference does that make?
Yes. There's so much judgment. Because
Judgment.
I will be the first to say that when I go into a shopping mall and let's say it's 9 p.m. and I still see little kids lying in their prams like half asleep, I judge that parent for bringing their kid there. I know I shouldn't, but I do judge. And then the other side of the camp is that parents judge people like me who sleep train my baby. And you helped me sleep train Noah since he was 3.5 months old. Thank God. Because right now, what I can say is my husband and I can go out for date nights. I can actually take calls, at a certain time, 8:30, 9 p.m. And most of the time, fingers crossed, Noah still sleeps through the night. And he's 6 now.
Yeah.
So it's been 6 years of that. And that is actually so important. I know couples where they've never stepped foot into a cinema, let alone date night, right? They've never traveled without their kids for years and years. And their kids still sleep with them in the same bed. I don't know how they do that.
Well, I don't know how they do it. I know that my husband certainly didn't want that because, a strong family unit comes from the strong bond of a parent and of the parents, involved, the husband and wife. And if you can't do husband and wife type things, then it is really difficult, right? Like the unit sort of disintegrates. So I agree, it can be really hard to not be a little bit judgmental around it. But then I also think, because I am getting on in age, I sort of try to be a little bit live and let live. And I know the benefits of good sleep because I work in sleep all the time. And But some parents just don't. And
Yes.
some parents think that children, I often hear phrases like, oh, I can't wait to get my life back after we've had a baby. But the challenge is that, well, the reality is actually that your life changes and it shouldn't go back to what it was, because it isn't what it was, because you now have children involved or a child involved. I do feel that sometimes you see parents that, have their kids out really late at night. And it's very much like, I get a bit like...
I know it's very hard not to judge.
It is
I know.
hard not
I
to
tell
judge.
myself not to judge, have compassion. We don't know what's going on in their lives.
Exactly.
So, Louise, can you tell me, because you have been labeled by some people as the Rolls Royce of sleep trainers in Singapore, how long has sleep training been around?
Look, I think I've been at this for 10 years. It was 10 years in August since I started my business. And when I started my business, there was maybe 2 or 3 other sleep coaches around there. And, since then, it has really exploded. Having said that, my children are now 12 and 15. I started my business because I sleep trained my daughter, who was a horrible sleeper. My son wasn't that much better either. But
how old was she when you sleep
she
trained
was
her?
8.5 months. And it really was only because I didn't know that sleep coaches existed. I sucked it up with my first one. He wasn't a great sleeper, but he wasn't awful either, in the sense that he was very easy to get back to sleep, but he did wake up a lot at night time. His saving grace was that he was the most amazing napper on the planet. So, when he wasn't sleeping well at night, I knew that I could always get a 2-hour nap in during the day when he napped.
Okay.
So it was very much, I sleep trained my daughter. I went back and I sleep trained my son. And it was only through that through sleep training, that I was able to see that there was a real gap in the market.
And so it sounds like it's been in Singapore for over 10 years, but globally it's been around for many, many years.
Look, I think that in a way, sleep training's been, I know my mother, I'm 51, I'm not scared to say it. She sleep trained us because that was just the way in the 70s. You put your kid into bed, we cried and we fell asleep, and that was that. And my mum had 3 kids, 2 and under, at one point. So she was a busy lady. And back then, dads weren't terribly involved in bringing up kids. So, it was either...
You just get on with it.
She had to get on with it. I think it's been around for a very, very long time in different formats.
So for the benefit of the listeners out there who may be hearing about sleep training for the first time, how do we define sleep training?
Okay, so... it's quite interesting because oftentimes people will come to me and they will say, we've been sleep training our baby and it's not working. In actual fact, what they've done is they have put a sleep training method in place. The challenge with sleep training is that it's not just looking at a sleep training method and see if it works. You have to make sure that the foundation in which that method's going to be laid across is strong and firm and that has good sleep hygiene. So, for example, when I get parents that come to me and say, oh, we've been trying this on our own for 2 weeks and all my baby does is cry for an hour every night, then there's a problem with it because the foundation isn't right. The foundation consists of, how much food your baby's having, when they're having their food, their room environment, how much exercise, and activity time your baby's getting. In Singapore, that is a really big issue because we are busy parents and we have, we've got parents that help, we've got helpers. Babies often can get carried around for the first 12 months of their life and not really exercise enough to create the right amount of tiredness. So there's lots of different, there's lots of different different pieces to what I call the sleep puzzle that have to fall into place for a sleep training method to work.
So from what you're sharing with me, it sounds like sleep training is really about having consistency and basic sleep hygiene put in place. How does sleep hygiene look like?
Sleep hygiene is just, I guess, a fancy term for a good bedtime routine or a good nap time routine. The key to consistent good sleep is being able to do it independently. And the way we do that is to ensure that there are no sleep props or sleep associations or sleep crutches, whatever words you like to use, as part of the bedtime or nap time routine. So what that would mean is things like no feeding to sleep or feeding to drowsy. once age appropriate, removing the pacifier, trying not to pat and rock your baby to sleep. They are what are considered sleep props.
This is hilarious because someone just told me that in China, they just invented like a robotic arm to pat the baby's butt to sleep. Have you seen that?
Yeah, I have. There's always something new out there. What I would say to anybody that's considering these sorts of things is that, it might work for a while, but it's not going to work forever.
It's not.
And, it's really important to know sleep is an autonomous pursuit. Even as a married couple, I can fall asleep without my husband next to me. In actual fact, I probably fall asleep better because he snores. Although he says I do as well. So, sleep is autonomous. We shouldn't need to rely on other people or things to be there to fall asleep.
Yes. Okay, let's talk about the importance of sleep. I used to be one of those where I subscribe to the belief sleep is for the weak. I will sleep when I'm dead. And I can survive on 4 or 5 hours of sleep. But that was in my 20s, right? I'm now 42. I'm also okay to talk about my age. And I'm so grateful to you that I sleep trained my second son successfully with your help. With my first son, it was much more challenging. I tried to do it on my own. And then I got another sleep trainer, but it didn't really work out. And I was thinking, okay, maybe this is it. But thank God with my second son, a friend recommended you. And because of that, my husband and I could go out in the evenings, right? He would be in bed by 7:30 when he was a baby. Now he's 6. He goes to bed at 8:30, 9, and it's doable. He will sleep through the night. He sleeps independently. And even when he's sick, okay, I will always remember what you told me. It's so important that he still falls asleep independently. He's never, ever slept in my bed. And I'm actually very proud of that. Yeah. And so sleep is important. We know this, more so as a 42 and a 51-year-old. Why is sleep so important to kids especially?
Oh, goodness. We could be here all day talking about that. Sleep ultimately is the ultimate mood regulator straight off the bat. When we are well rested, we are happier, kinder, more productive humans. Back to what you were saying about the sleep when we're dead and sleep is for the weak, I often think that we live in a society that wears lack of sleep as a badge of honor. But in actual fact, lack of sleep is only going to, lead to stroke and heart attacks, to name just two. Sleep is vital. And, part of that I often think is that if sleep wasn't vital, evolution would have knocked it out. And it is a really important factor for everyone, not just children. So, the elements of sleep is that it's vital for brain development. It's vital for helping us have the energy to want to be curious in our world and to develop both physically and mentally. It helps us build a strong immune system. I don't know about you, but I know that when I'm sick, I want to sleep more than I normally would because that's my body's way of saying, hey, this is going to help me. It's going to help me get better.
So, Louise, you're Australian, but you've been in Singapore for over 10 years, right?
I've been here 1,000 years, it feels like, Pete. I actually first moved to Singapore just before I got married in 2002.
Yes. So let's talk about a typical bedtime scene in Singapore. Okay, because Singapore is different from many other countries. We have nannies, we have helpers, we are quite well taken care of bunch of people. Actually, what do you usually see happening in the first 30 minutes before lights out?
Look, there is a lot of families that I work with, both local families and expats, that don't have a bedtime routine to start with. They just think, oh, the baby's tired, we'll put them to bed. Having a good bedtime routine is super important, and a good bedtime routine for, say, a newborn baby to 2 is probably 40 minutes. From 2 onwards, it's probably only 30 minutes. And it's really important because it's that time of the day where, if you've been working all day and the only time you get to spend with your children is the time before going to bed, you want to have that strong connection while you're there. It's that quality time versus quantity time. So keeping it calm and consistent is really important. And because it is the wind down.
Yep.
It's that very last thing of the day where it's like, let's make it really calm and kind and fun so that if it's only 30 minutes you spend with your children all day, so that you know that you can send your children off to bed knowing that they are well loved and well looked after.
So someone who's listening into this might be thinking, well, Louise is from Australia and maybe Shulin has been brainwashed by Western media, right? And so some people think sleep training is only for the Western culture. It doesn't suit Asian cultural values.
Yeah.
What do you say to that?
Well, I think that's wrong because it's quite interesting. When I started my business 10 years ago, I thought that my business would be very much Western expat community. In actual fact, I would say 60 to 70% of my business is local families. Because, we all need to sleep and we love our children, but nobody wants to be up at midnight rocking a baby to sleep that hasn't slept and who's overtired. And I just think that, I guess it probably is something, Western. But having said that, I have plenty of friends in Australia that wouldn't sleep train their kids. So I don't think it's a universal Western.
That's true. That's true. That's true. So actually what works in the Asian family context, because we also have grandparents sometimes, both sides. And that's something which maybe in Australia, you don't see that much of.
Yeah, look, I'll talk for me in particular. Like if my mother came into my home at bedtime and said, no, you're not doing it this way, I don't want you to do it this way, she would get the sharp shift of thank you for your input, but it's not welcome. Whereas I do feel that, that Eastern culture is a lot more respectful towards their families, and it tends to be a family decision. When I'm working with multi-generational families, I am very, very, very upfront. And I will say to the parents of the baby, it's like if you live with Shulin, if you lived with your mother-in-law, I would say that it's your husband's responsibility to manage that and to get their buy-in, but equally to then explain what you're trying to achieve. And it can be tough. Like I have been was chased out of a home years ago with a broom by a grandma. I had another
with a broom.
Oh yeah, she was not happy.
Wow.
I've got another granddad that when we started the sleep training, he went next door into the karaoke room and started, with the door open and started belting out his favourite hits. And that soon obviously derailed things. So it very much is. It can be hard. And it's very, I'm very mindful to be respectful, but I'm also somebody that if you approach me and that's what you want to do, it's not for me to manage your family. You've got to manage it you've got to manage it.
I think everyone needs to see the benefits,
Yeah.
the short-term and long-term benefits for the kid. Because obviously everyone in the family loves the kid. They want what's best. Yeah. And sometimes they just can't see that this will lead to the best. Is it better to lead in a conversation like that with your elders because you want to be respectful with the long-term benefits?
Yeah, I think so. I think that obviously, it's sadly one of those things that you have to go through it to then see the benefits of it. I had another family that I worked for. They were lovely. It was an Indian family. Dad had taken a secondment in the US and mum had a senior role here, and they had twin boys. And they were 12 months old. They weren't eating well. They were horrible sleepers. Mum was breastfeeding as well as having this big corporate job.
Gosh.
And it was horrible for them. And it was interesting because grandma was in town from India helping, and she did not like me, but her daughter-in-law was just like, you're either part of my solution or part of my problem, you choose. And she disliked me. I could tell that when I went into their home. But by the end of them sleep training these kids, grandma was going back to Mumbai saying, these people are amazing. You should work with her. And I actually had a lot of clients then come to me from Mumbai.
Wow.
Because grandma had suggested, doing that. And,
amazing. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of it always sticks. This story really always sticks in my head because I can remember the mum at the end was like, I would have just been happy to be up 5 times a night to my boys instead of 10. And I was just like, oh, babe, we have I had such high hopes for you than that. But,
my
when we get
gosh.
really desperate,
Yes.
some parents will think, oh, waking up 4 times a night is better than waking up 10 times a night.
Oh.
And I think that we can do a lot better than that.
That's awful. I don't get up at night.
No,
you know,
I don't get up
Yeah,
at night.
that's just like, no, that's a no-go. So, but you managed to help the two babies sleep through the
They
night?
slept through the night by night 3, and they were
wow.
a bit of a, like, it was funny. I can remember on the discovery call that I did with them, I
Yes.
was on the phone to her for an hour telling her that she needed to buy cots again and she'd only just sold them.
Oh.
And she was negotiating with me and I kept on saying to the mum, I am not going to work with you with your 1-year-olds if they're not in a bed, like in a
Yes.
cot. So it was quite interesting because
Yes.
at the end she was like, I fought you every step of the way. And I'm like, yeah, but then you did surrender and we got the job done.
Yes.
And I mean,
great.
those boys must be 11 now.
Yeah, they owe so much to you.
Yeah.
I owe so much to you. Okay, let's talk about sleep training. Okay, we think sleep training is actually for the kids, but it's actually really about sleep training the parents. I would love for you to go through a list of all the things you would list down if a parent is listening in, thinking about sleep training. And I will probably say sleep training is not for you if you can't bear hearing your kid crying. But I want to hear Louise Duncan's list.
Well, look, the thing with sleep, back to your point saying that sleep training is sleep training parents, sleep training is about behavior. It's parents changing their behavior so their children will follow. Because we are all creatures of habit. We all work on behavior. So, if your baby's only ever been rocked to sleep in your arms with a bottle in their mouth, well, that's what they think sleep looks like. And you have very lovingly taught them that. Now, I'm not saying it's wrong, and I'm not going to sit here and tell a parent that they're doing it all wrong because that's not my job. And I don't feel that because I think that all you've done is loved your baby. But when you get to that point where it's not optimal, you as a parent have to look inwards to then make some changes. So then, and it's also knowing that, look, ideally a baby should fall asleep on their back, right? In their cot or in their crib or wherever you want to put them down. But in order to teach independent skills, we say sleeping in their cot on their back. But if they've only ever been rocked, then obviously when you put them in the cot the first time, they are going to cry because they're going to think, well, what am I doing here? You normally rock me with a bottle in my mouth and now you're laying me in the cot. What's going on? It's not that they hate the cot. It's just that they don't know what to do when they get there because they've only ever gone in there asleep.
Yes.
So, when it comes to parents changing their behavior, it can be hard because we all get stuck in it. And
Yes.
it can be hard to think, especially when a baby does cry because they are confused. It's very, very common for parents, mums in particular, to say, oh my goodness, I've done it wrong because they're crying. But in actual fact, it's part, it is sadly part of the process, which is what makes it so polarizing. But the crying subsides very quickly. And, all of a sudden, when your baby does cry after you've been through this process, you'll know that there's actually something wrong. It's not because they're tired.
By habit.
Yeah.
Sleep training was really hard though. I will say this, right? I'll admit it was one of the hardest things I ever had to do and to do it twice.
Yeah.
But it's also the best thing that I've ever done.
Yeah.
What will you say to a parent who's listening in and just thinking, well, I can't bear hearing my kids cry, right? That's just so difficult. Why is it so difficult?
Well, it's difficult because, there are 2 main triggers in life, and they've done studies on this: sleep deprivation and children crying. So you combine those 2 things and you've got the ultimate trigger. So, and I think, as parents, and again, mums in particular, it has been, we've been conditioned over centuries to think that we have to nurture our child, and if they're crying, we're not doing the right thing. So, it's impossible. It's why, this week I spoke to somebody who reached out to me, 18 months ago, and they're still in the same predicament from 18 months ago. And, she's just like, I think I'm now ready. And it's just extraordinary that,
Yes.
but part of, her biggest challenge was, oh my goodness, my baby's going to cry. The challenge is that when you now have a 2-year-old versus a 6-month-old, they're going to cry a whole lot louder too.
Yes.
Because they get much bigger lungs,
Because they can walk out of the room now.
and they can talk and mummy, I can remember when I sleep trained my 3.5-year-old, he used to yell at me, mummy, cuddle you me, mummy, cuddle you me, mummy. And it broke my heart.
Yeah.
But I also knew that it was something I was doing for him because he was a horrible sleeper. He had bags under his eyes and he was 3.5. Like, that is not okay. He was quite lethargic a lot of the time. Now, I know the heat in Singapore contributes to that as well. But, he wasn't as active as his little friends.
Yes.
And, he'd want to sleep all day, but then he wouldn't sleep at nighttime. So it was really challenging.
Oh, it's heartbreaking though when I remember, when I would see through the baby cam, my baby's crying and I cannot immediately go to him.
Yeah.
I had to do the intervals, but it paid off.
Like when you lay them in the cot and you've always, you've loved on them all day, you've kissed and cuddled them, putting them to bed, you've told them I love you, but they're crying. They're crying because they're confused because it wasn't what you did last night, and they're crying because they're tired. It's the end of the day. They are tired or they're ready for a nap and they are tired.
So the main reason I believe parents quit sleep training or don't even try is because of the crying, or they feel that they are very bad parents.
Yeah, I think it's both. Like, I think that, I get a lot. Look, I worked with somebody not so long ago who did all the hard work to sleep train their baby. And this little girl did beautifully. And then 2 weeks after we finished the program, they rang me and they're like, oh, we've gone back to co-sleeping. And I said, oh, well, why was that? And the mum said, I just missed her too much at nighttime. And it was just quite sad because they'd gone through it for they put their baby through a process for no real reason because the thing was that when they went back to co-sleeping, the sleep deteriorated.
Of course.
Which is the reason why they reached out to me to start with.
Yes.
So
sounds like the baby is the mom's sleep crutch.
Yeah, exactly.
A little bit.
And I do think that, it just is hard.
It is hard.
And I think that, I often say to parents, the methodology is simple, but it's not easy.
It's not.
Because I'm asking you to do something extraordinarily practical with a hugely emotional heart, and it's hard.
Oh, yes. And with a baby whom you love with every fiber of your being, you want what's best.
Yeah.
So actually, I think the reason why I didn't quit and the reason why I sought you out is, and every time, even when Noah is sick or even Nathan is 9 now, I remember what you tell me, right? That they need to independently fall asleep at that very last moment.
Yeah.
Because if I'm the one there, right? And especially even if they're sick. And this is even after Noah had his surgery.
Yeah.
I made sure, I was sleeping in the same room as him, but I made sure he fell asleep on his own because I don't want to be that sleep crutch.
No.
And I just keep thinking about, I need to have the best interest at heart.
Yeah.
That's the main thing that drives me, actually.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I think that sometimes we have to put our own ego aside for a little bit and think what is best for this little one. Is them being cranky all day and me up all night and cranky all day as well, like the best serving of all of us.
Yes.
Sleep training isn't just about the baby. It's about your family unit. So, and I think that it's quite often, and I know I did this, is that I sleep trained my youngest and then went back and sleep trained my oldest. And I have a lot of clients in that same predicament because we are all of the opinion that, they'll outgrow it.
Yeah, what's the best age to sleep train your kid? And what's oldest? Like, if it's too old, like 8, 9 years old, are you a lost cause?
Look, I don't think anybody's ever a lost cause. Ever. Like, I think that you can always work on your sleep hygiene and your sleep health at any given age. The best age to sleep train a baby is in your or your child is when you yourself are ready to make the changes. Because it can't be that, if you try it for 2 days and then give up and then want to start again, all you can do is confuse your baby or your child. And that's even more important with a toddler. If you sleep train a toddler and you give in after 2 nights but then want to get started again on night 5, it just sends, it sends really mixed messages. And when kids get mixed messages, that's when they really are going to push the boundary.
And you've worked with families in many different situations, premature babies, special needs children, or even families who are doing shift work.
Yeah.
So I guess the rules don't apply uniformly, right?
Well, when we talk about rules, I would say that I don't generally talk about sleep rules. I talk about a sleep rhythm. Regardless of whether you've got a special needs child, whether you're a shift worker, etc. I think the rhythm of how you put your child to sleep needs to remain the same. The other thing to bear in mind is that we all have a circadian rhythm, right? So your job might be 10 till 10 at night time until 10 in the morning, but in actual fact, I mean, there's been loads of studies done on shift workers, and you would think that because they prolifically are doing these shifts that their circadian rhythm would shift, and it doesn't. Like our body and brain likes following what our environment outside does.
Oh, wow.
Which is why by 7 o'clock in the morning, most people are up. It takes a very special, I know that I like to have a sleep in, but I will wake up and go, oh, it's 7 o'clock and it's Saturday, I'll go back to sleep. And that's very different.
Okay, let's talk a little bit more about why sleep training is so polarizing, right? Because at the heart of it all, we all want what's best for our kids, and we all love our kids, right? Of course, naturally. And the parents who, I guess, judge and shame people like us who sleep train our kids, they're coming from a good place too. They just believe that it's not right to leave a baby to cry on their own.
Yeah. Look, I'll be really honest, and it might be a surprise to people, but I'm not a sleep zealot. If you co-sleep with your baby and that works for you, you do you. If you want to be up all night, or if that's the choice that you make to be up at night rocking your baby, then by all means, that is your choice because it is your baby. But, equally then I expect the same grace on my side, that as someone that sleep trains people and that has also sleep trains babies, and also I've sleep trained my own children, I do feel that I wouldn't ask you to do anything that I wouldn't do with my children. And I've got two lovely children that sleep beautifully. Like my 15-year-old is now sleeping back like a newborn. Like he'll knock out a 13-hour night tonight.
Wow.
Weekend. He just loves it. But that's part of his development at this age anyway. It's interesting that that 2-year-olds and 12 and 15-year-olds need the same amount of night sleep. So
Okay, so Louise, when I was struggling while I was going through sleep training for my child, I would Google, am I damaging my child's brain? Am I denying them of secure attachment? Will they grow up to hate me? And, there's always that story about the Romanian orphanage where all these babies were abandoned, of course, and they were crying and crying. And then after that, they just stopped crying because no one came to them. So I felt awful, actually.
Yeah, look, I mean, I haven't heard the Romanian orphanage analogy for a very long time, thank goodness. What I would say to that, and I've always said to that, is that a baby in an orphanage in somewhere like Romania where they don't even have their own cot to themselves because they're so overcrowded. You're looking at children, you're looking at small babies, and it breaks my heart that are not getting even their basic needs met. They're not getting their nappies changed. They're not getting enough food. It's a very sad situation. But that is very different to us here in Singapore having our babies cry for a little bit in their cot, because at no time would I ever ask you just to park your baby up and that's it. You're not going back in there for the night. That's not what sleep training should be. It's very much that we are going to give a baby some space and some grace to have some time to try and figure it out. And then after a while, if they get really upset, we will go back in and have a little check-in on them. Do it like I call it a wellness check-in. Go in, offer some touch, offer some voice comfort, and then say, okay, baby, I know you're okay. I'm just going to step out, or I'm going to go and sit over here for a little bit.
So basically, it's like giving them the ability to learn how to fall asleep on their own.
On their own, exactly. Without, say, being rocked or pat or fed, or, at a particular, usually from 6 months onward, they shouldn't need to have a pacifier to fall asleep, because a pacifier will actually increase the need for you to be involved at night time, especially for such a young baby, because as soon as it falls out and they wake up, they all expect it back and they can't put it back in. So that's when you're back running in there doing what I call the pacifier shuffle.
But is it me denying my kid a secure attachment with me?
Not at all, because you're still interacting with them through the day. You're still loving on your baby. And look, I would argue that if you are that sleep deprived, that you can't function well, then that's when I would be more concerned about a baby's psychological health or their secure attachment.
That's true.
And it's also knowing that you're not the only one at home that looks after your baby. You might have, obviously there's a dad involved in some capacity, or a second mum or a second dad. It could be that there's grandparents involved, and it's about everyone loving on your baby, not just you. But by sleep training your baby, I would say that it's the ultimate act of love rather than of not loving your baby.
So what's one thing you wish more parents understood about sleep training?
That it's not all crying. The crying's actually very minimal. I had a dad that I worked with, again, this was back when I very first started. He was a scientist and he loved data, and he was a quirky human, and I liked him a lot because I'm a bit quirky. He did an analysis of his babies crying the week before sleep training, during the process, and then after sleep training. And it was quite interesting because that little boy, he cried more the week before sleep training than he did through the whole sleep training process.
Wow.
So, it is quite interesting. It's very much a case of, look, every baby's different. And if I remember correctly, I would say that his little one kind of was an average, kind of the amount of crying that he did was fairly standard. It was just quite interesting and reassuring to know that, when I get people saying to me, oh, but it just causes too much crying. It's like, well, in actual fact, it very quickly trended downwards.
Actually, when I think back to my sleep training journey for Noah, you're right. I'm probably just focused way more on that traumatic crying episodes. But overall, it wasn't all that bad. And it did trend downwards, of course.
Yeah. And look, if it's not trending downwards, then you've got a problem. There is no way. Look, by the end of week 1, if you're getting even half an hour of crying at bedtime, it is too much. And I'm the first one to step in and say, hey, what's going on? There's something that's not right.
Mm-hmm. If a family wants to see a noticeable change starting from tonight.
Yep.
And again, this podcast is not for you to go and, try and DIY. You can, by all means. But I'm just curious, what's one thing you would recommend to someone listening in? They just want to see a noticeable change tonight.
Just shift your bedtime routine, or actually create one. If you've got a young baby, instead of feeding them right before they go to bed, make it the first step of your bedtime routine instead of the last step. I always like to include a bath as bedtime. And I know that, if in the local society, baths at bedtime, everyone's like, oh, you'll get a chill. And it's like, it's Singapore, it's 32 degrees every day. Like, your baby's not going to get a chill. But having a bath at bedtime helps regulate body temperature, but equally, it gives your baby a chance to splash off the last of their energy, because I haven't come across any children that I can think of in my 10 years that have disliked having a bath. Like, every baby likes having a bath. But it's also that cornerstone event in the day that shifts the tone. It's very much, we have milk, we go for a bath, and then the rest of the bedtime routine will happen in the bedroom.
Yes.
So that you're making sure that you're not, I always say the daytime space is the playtime space, and then after dark, after the bath, you go into the bedroom.
Yes.
So a good bedtime routine, a good robust bedtime routine is paramount.
Yes, I love that. And I will say I even invented like a lullaby song of my own. I inserted my son's names into it. And I will even manage the expectations and say, we're going for a bath.
Yeah.
We're going to do bedtime story. And then I'll sing a song. And then bye-bye. And I'll see you in the morning.
Such a big one for that. Like, I always say I know with when I had my son, and look, it took me a long time to have him. So I was very very tentative with him. But I, to the point where mummy's now putting your onesie on, mummy's now going to wipe your bottom because you've done a poo. I've always been that parent that likes to talk things through with my kids. And I always say to parents, that's what, I would suggest doing that, because it certainly can't hurt. And to that point, when we are sleep training kids, I always say to parents, tell to them. Talk to your 6-month-old and say, look, we're making some changes. And to start with, it is going to be a little bit hard and you're probably going to be a bit upset, but mummy and daddy still love you. You know, but we have to make these changes, but it's going to be a little bit hard before it gets a little bit easier. Let's do it.
Yes.
And making sure the energy in the room is positive.
Yes.
You know, if you're sitting in the corner crying because your baby's crying, that energy is just going to shift and your baby's going to pick up on that because
of course.
we know that we all interact with one another in a way that can work. We'll put it this way. I have always taken that into my parenting is that I don't want to be that person that is really really influencing in a negative way the environment in our home.
Yes. In fact, for babies, they can sense your moods for sure.
Oh,
and I had to, the reason why I talk all those through is actually a way to calm myself too.
Yeah.
And because I know I kind of like brace myself for any resistance or any potential protests, I'm like, it's also to manage myself.
Yeah.
Like, this is what's happening now, this is what's happening next, and this is what you can expect.
Yeah.
And I tell myself, I need to expect that they will cry. I need to expect that.
Yeah. And look, I agree. It's a bit like, as an adult, I'm sure you probably do this. We all write lists, right? So that we remember what we need to do. We get a real boost of energy by being able to cross things off the list. I think what you're talking about is almost like, like a verbal list to our babies of what we're going to do and why we're going to do it. And I think that it does create calm within everybody because, we are the single biggest influence in our children's life.
Yes.
If we walk around, belittling people or being rude to people, that's what our kids are going to do. And it's for the same with the stress. Like if you bring a whole lot of stress into your household's going to be very stressful.
Absolutely. So every family, every situation, and every child is different.
That's my job in the sleep world. It's educating my parents on why sleep is important and the way in which we're going to achieve better sleep for your family, to then cheerlead you on and then to keep you accountable and help you troubleshoot. Sometimes I have to have some pretty strong conversations because ultimately my job is to cross the finish line with you whereby you're reaching the goals that you set for yourself and equally, hopefully reaching the goals that I set for you as well because often I have higher expectations than parents do.
I love that because this brings back memories. I remember I was standing outside, I was trying to DIY sleep training for my first kid and I would stand outside his door, he's crying and I'm like flipping the book furiously, Googling and like wondering what to do. But I eliminated that guesswork with my second kid when thank God, you came to help me out because that was a big shift. Like you were available on WhatsApp support and you're like, Shulin, don't worry, you'll get through this. And I did. So my imagination, before I knew about sleep training and I didn't have a bedtime routine, I'm just speculating that there are a lot of parents where they're so tired by the time they get home, they might offer a screen to a kid, which is common. And or they might be playing games because they're just like, oh my gosh, I miss seeing you. And the kid is excited to see the parent. But all these things, a screen and or game time or tickle fights, gets them really excited.
Yeah, like screens in particular because, our screens are all blue light. And blue light is a stimulant that it doesn't block production of melatonin, but it can certainly shift it, which isn't ideal. So we try to avoid, we call it the power down hour, whereby, at least an hour before bedtime, there should be no screens. With regards to running around before bedtime, look, I'm not too bothered by that if it's not like let's run around or let's have tickles and then let's turn the lights off. I always think that like if you're going to do those sorts of things, do it before your children have a bath so that after they've had a bath that it's kind of the business end of the bedtime routine. It's like, come on then, let's get your jammies on, let's clean your teeth, let's read a story together, let's sit here quietly, read some stories, and then it's time for the lights off.
Oh, talking about night lights, there will come an age where it would be necessary. Like 3 years old?
Yeah, around 2.5, 3, usually get kids that will say, I'm scared.
Yes.
And that's when fear comes in.
Yes, but before
So-
that, complete darkness.
Complete darkness. And if you are going to use a night light, use a red light. And I know it can look a little bit scary, but it's going to stop overstimulation at nighttime. Whatever you do, never use a blue light or a white light because that is a stimulation. And then like if your baby falls asleep but then wakes up and there's this big white light or blue light on, they are going to wake up and think that
Oh
it's daytime.
dear, because my son is using a white light, night light now. So it's either a red light.
Red or an orange. Just
Red or orange.
like you want warm
Okay.
colours, not
Okay.
stark colours.
Okay, got it. But I did get it from a baby store though. You would think,
But there's a lot of kit out there. Like,
Okay.
I mean, I've written to baby companies saying,
yes.
you know, as a sleep coach, I would suggest this for your sleep training clock. You hear nothing.
Wow. What's the best night light that you would recommend?
Look, it depends on children. Like if I was working with a toddler, I love, there's a night light called Sam the Lamb or Davy Dog.
Okay.
And I like them because first of all, they replicate the traffic light system. So they're red, orange and green.
Wow.
So it's I make up a little rhyme. You're talking about making up a nursery rhyme, like a song for your baby.
Yes.
I make up little rhymes. You know, red, red, stay in bed, and then so it's red at night time, and it's a little. Say Sam the Lamb, he's a little sheep. He's got poppy eyes. So at night time, his clock will turn red and his eyes will close.
Oh,
And then half an hour before wake up time, it'll go orange.
okay.
And the idea behind it going orange is that if your child wakes up when it is orange, the principle behind it is let's just wait. You can be awake, but you've got to wait until it goes green. And then when it turns green, his eyes pop open and his tummy turns green. And I always say to the parents, you know, say to them, green is when I can get up and be seen.
Oh, so cute.
So, you know, like I'm a poet, obviously.
So cute. You're very talented. Very talented. So if the listeners only remember one thing from our conversation, what would you like it to be?
I guess one thing, like what I would say is that sleep is not a Prada handbag. Like it's lovely to have a Prada handbag or a Chanel handbag or any kind of handbag that's got a nice label on it, but it's a nice to have, not a need to have. Sleep is important. Like it really is what drives all of us. And as I said earlier, if we didn't need to sleep, evolution would sort it out, and it hasn't.
Okay, I want to say that with my first kid, I did DIY,
Yeah.
right? It didn't work out so well. And there are people who can DIY sleep training and they do it well. Great. And I love your analogy. Can you share with the listeners about the hair dye analogy?
Oh, yeah. Well, we were talking earlier and I just said, you know, like you can go to the chemist and buy a box dye and you can do a reasonable job with it. But equally, you might then go to the hairdresser and they'll say, well, look, that colour's not actually that great on your skin tone. Let's tone it down a little bit. Let's put some highlights in. And it can be very different. Like I know that I can't be a hairdresser at home. So, you know, I seek out an expert.
So when I was a new mom, Louise, Google was my best friend. I even Googled, can you outsource breastfeeding, right? Because that was very hard. That's the next hardest thing, I would say. And I went from, I guess, judging myself very harshly for wanting to do sleep training, you know, hearing people judge me, and then becoming the person who judges other parents, to now at 42 having a lot more compassion for myself, for other moms who are struggling. There is no one size fits all. You know, just respecting that everyone, you know, they have to figure out their own way. And my purpose in inviting you here was really for my listeners to hear from you, the subject matter expert, as to how you've helped other families transform. So for me today, I don't think I'm a monster for doing that. In fact, I'm so glad I stuck it out. And thanks to you. So I'm very grateful to you, Louise.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for tuning in. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends, your colleagues, your family. It will mean so much to us if you like and subscribe as well. And see you next time for the next episode of The Real Reason.